Detection Collaborative, a detection dog training trio with Stacy Barnett.
Hi.
Robin Greubel.
Hey there.
And Crystal Wing.
What's up?
With humor and a big dose of theory, our trio talks practical training advice and features interviews with top trainers and scientists.
It's Canine Detection Collaborative.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Canine Detection Collaborative. I am Robin Greubel, and I am here with Crystal Wing.
Hello, friends.
And we have a super special guest here today, Katylynn Sloan. I'm going to probably mess up your title, so I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
So I'm Katylynn Sloan. I work at the United States Secret Service in the Advanced Research and Capabilities Division, which just means I do a lot of R&D work, but that also means I get to do a lot of R&D work for dog stuff due to my background. So pretty easy when you speak Govy.
And Stacy's lurking. She's in the background. So when we usually do interviews, the person who is not interviewing is like in the background asking questions in the chat. So Katylynn, tell us how you kind of got to where you are.
So going back in the day, we're going to go way, way back. So I went to undergraduate school at West Virginia University in the Forensics and Investigative Science program. And part of that Bachelor's of Science program, you had to do a mentorship. And during that mentorship, I went and worked for the Allegheny County Fire Marshal. And they had an accelerant detection canine. So that was like my first introduction to dogs and seeing them working. And it was absolutely amazing. This was a food reward dog, beautifully working dog. Every time that before they went out, they would calibrate the dog. Amazing. So I'm getting up there in age, and I graduated from undergraduates in 2008, which is not a good time to get a job. So I went to grad school. And in grad school, I actually went to Florida International, where I worked with Dr. Kenneth Furton, who's well known in the canine community. And there I actually did my PhD working on validating non-hazardous, non-controlled explosive detection canine training aids. I also worked on the universal detector calibrant, which we made to help us calibrate dogs to ensure that they're working to their best potential, but also something that can be used for puppies to help you figure out whether or not they're suitable for certain types of detection work. Because we all know you might have a dog with a great nose, but if they're a little barky or a little aggressive towards the aid, probably not the best bomb dog. Might be an excellent drug dog or search and rescue, but probably not that bomb dog. So that helps you not pigeonhole a dog into a certain type of discipline of detection. So I worked on that. And then after grad school, I got hired straight into the Secret Service, where I've been for the past coming up on 12 years next month. I'm doing a lot of canine research along with working on the explosive detection program. So my realm is mainly with dogs and explosives, but I have had to branch out into other things, all things dealing with dogs, which has really expanded that scope into search and rescue, drug detection dogs, tracking, trailing, and things like that, just because there's very little science. So once you find somebody who knows the science, you really expand your scope on that. So
you're a PhD in chemistry.
Yes.
That works in dogs.
Yes and no. My day job is working on explosive detection projects. So like when you walk into an airport, everything you see there to go through that checkpoint falls within my job description to figure out what we're going to use, why we're going to use it, do we need to get better at it, right? And then I also get to work on the dog stuff just because I have the background there. So we use dogs to detect a lot of things, and they are very effective. And I just don't have a tool that can replace a dog. I don't have that. There's nothing out there that can replace what a dog can do. I don't even know if we're going to get that in my lifetime, but that's kind of where I fall with that.
So should we be concerned about the TSA?
Why? Why would you be concerned? So a great part about being me is the Secret Service is part of DHS, so the Department of Homeland Security, which TSA is also a part of. CBP, or Customs and Border Protection, they're also a part of, which means that we actually get to do a lot of collaborative work across the board. So I get to chat with them about their programs. They come and chat with us about our projects and programs. And, CBP is looking for drugs, but I still get to work with them, especially when they have questions and things like that, or I have questions for them. We get to work together. And that's a great part of being part of this organization. And it also expands outside of DHS as well, because through different working groups and things like that, because I am a member of the ASB, which is the American Academy of Forensic Sciences. That's the A. Standards Board, the SB. As part of that, I've gotten to work with a lot of different organizations, both in the US and foreign, working on standards. And through those relationships, we've actually been able to work together and then lean on each other when we get questions and things like that. Because I don't know all of the answers, especially when it comes. I was asked a question about canine hearing protection and, what kind of canine hearing protection. And through these relationships, because the canine community is small but large at the same time. So, but through those community and those relationships, I was actually able to ask, hey, has anybody worked with canine hearing protection? And then you find out, hey, nothing's ever actually been appropriately tested. There are people out there selling things, but they've never been independently tested. And that's kind of where sometimes my job falls in, because what we were looking at, I had to go and tell the guys, I'm like, hey, I can get you canine hearing protection, but then the dogs can't hear you. So if you want to keep with your verbal commands, the dogs can't hear that verbal command. So here's your pros, here's your cons, and then make a choice from there as to what they thought was the best path forward, because they needed that ability to give the verbal command. And so it turns out the hearing protection that we were looking for wasn't right, because the dogs, it was too good, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Because it muffled out everything.
I think that's how I met you. We sit on ASB together. And you send out some of the most random questions about things sometimes. I'm like, that's an interesting little comment.
Yeah.
We've got some interesting things coming out of ASB that people need to be aware of. And so the explosive standards out there.
Yeah.
So from your aspect, what are some of the most interesting things about the explosive standard?
That standard got published, I think, in 2021 early. And so that means it's coming up for review. So if you have read it and you don't like it, be aware it's coming out for review. So these standards get reviewed, I think, every 5 years or so.
Yes.
But one of the big changes that came with this standard was we actually switched out one of the mandatory training aids. We removed nitroglycerin-based explosives as a mandatory explosive that the dogs had to be certified on, and replaced that with ammonium nitrate. So the mandatory explosives that you have to certify on now, there are 6, are TNT-based, RDX-based, PETN-based, black powder, double-based smokeless powder, and ammonium nitrate.
Why did we switch out nitroglycerin for ammonium nitrate?
That was a tough lift, but a logical one, because ammonium nitrate explosives have really replaced a lot of the market share, because nitroglycerin is just too hard to work with, right? So because it's so hard to work with, people went towards a more stable explosive, which is ammonium nitrate. It's easy to get, it's very stable, so it's easier to work with. So we're actually seeing that. Also, because if you were to look at the US bomb data, which you can go on Tripwire and there's public access, you just have to Google bomb stats. You'll actually see for the past few years, military explosives like PETN, RDX, TNT, all of those things that are military explosives, so C4, Simtex, all of that, we don't really see in the US. We see a lot of ammonium nitrate. We see a lot of smokeless powder, black powder. We see a lot of Pyrodex, which is a black powder substitute. We see a ton of fireworks. And fireworks will get called fireworks, but they're really like potassium chlorates, potassium perchlorates, and the nitrates and things like that. So those are what we would call the salts, because in fireworks, they make the pretty colors, but they're also oxidizers, which makes them very accessible because they're not exactly regulated. So if we think back to the Boston bombers, they use like recovered fireworks in their bombs. So that's kind of where the change went. And one of the big questions that we got was, you didn't go far enough because we're not requiring the salts being mandatory. And in the US, we're seeing a ton of them. That's the vast majority of what you're seeing with the Jim Bobs out in the woods blowing up tree stumps, kids experimenting. They're all using things that they can go to, depending upon your state. I live in Virginia. I can go to Walmart and buy, right? I can go to Walmart and I can buy an exploding target. I can get tannerite, right?
Right.
So not every state can, but why go through the hardship of making something or stealing something when you can go to Walmart and you can buy it?
And ammonium nitrate, it's fertilizer.
Yes, ammonium nitrate is fertilizer. And then overseas, where the government has tried to regulate this. So they switched from ammonium nitrate, which if you work on a farm, I grew up on a farm, it's regulated. So if you want to buy a lot of it, you have to have special permits and all that jazz. But overseas, they actually switched to CAN, which is calcium ammonium nitrate.
Yep.
But you can still use that too. It still works. So even still, it's just, again, it's one of those things that I'm actually really proud of that explosive standard, because we really took a deep dive into what training aids should be selected, how to select them. There's an annex or an appendix at the back with a really giant table that gives you like, hey, if I want to be on pure TNT, this is what I want to look for when I buy it. If I want to be on ammonium nitrate. And that's because over the years, and I've been doing this for a long time now, like 17 years now, I would work with people and they're like, hey, my dogs are on dynamite. I'm like, great. And we put out nitroglycerin and they walk it because they're like, yeah, my dogs are on dynamite. And I'd put out a nitroglycerin dynamite and they just couldn't find it. And we're like, what is going on? And then I look at it and I'm like, what kind of dynamite? And he's like, dynamite. Do you know that dynamite's like saying Kleenex? Like it's kind of a classifier. So there are nitroglycerin-based dynamites and there are ammonium nitrate-based dynamites. And what he thought was nitroglycerin was actually ammonium nitrate. So it's not exactly his fault, because if you don't know to look, you would think that you are fine, right?
Right.
Because how many people know that if I say dynamite, if you're of an older generation, you're going to think back to Wile E. Coyote nitroglycerin. That's not the case anymore, because if it crystallizes, you have to rotate the sticks every few months so it doesn't crystallize, and then you pick it up and it pops off. It's hard to get.
Well, and I've always heard that nitroglycerin is a very loud odor and it contaminates the rest of your kit if you don't store things correctly.
Yes. From a chemistry's perspective, you're going to call it loud. I'm going to call it has a high vapor pressure.
Okay.
Nitroglycerin, it wants to be in the air, right? It wants to be in the air. It doesn't it just wants to spread and go. And that's great for dog detection because it makes it easy to detect. Like even a vapor sensor, like handheld sensors are terrible they're terrible because they're good at detecting things, but they can't get enough of the sample in. So it's a sampling problem. The dogs have figured this out. The dogs, they will smash nitroglycerin. But when you go to store it, if you're not storing it right, it will completely contaminate everything. And then nitroglycerin is also found with EGDN. Please don't ask me what that stands for, but it's kind of a taggant used.
Okay.
Also a very high vapor pressure. It contaminates everything. There's some work that John Goodpaster did a few years ago, and they published a couple articles on it, some of his grad students, where they bought explosives from different manufacturers and they put them out, how handlers and trainers are storing their training aids and putting them out for use and seeing what the contamination looked like. And if you had nitroglycerin or EGDN, everything had nitroglycerin or EGDN or DMMB, which is the taggant commonly found in like C4 and plastic explosives. So those things are in there to make them easier to detect, which makes them easier to contaminate, if that makes sense too. So
it makes everything in your training kit easier to detect.
Yeah. Except if you're a bad guy and don't have those things, then they don't smell like that.
Right.
But on a good note for dog handlers out there and trainers is that most people making explosives, like the big companies, they're storing it all together. So they kind of all get some kind of meshed together smell just from the start. So John Goodpaster's group, it was, I think they just changed their name from IUPUI to IUI. So I think it's the Indiana University or Indianapolis University of Indiana. They're no longer, they took off the Purdue, I think, but
okay.
But he did a lot of work in that area. And so does Lauren DeGrief out of Florida International. So we went to grad school together, and now she left after a long time working for the government in the Navy Research Laboratory, went back to academia and doing research. And now I get to work with her on the other side of things. So they're doing a lot of research as well into environmental contamination. And she's had some great students come out working where they purposely put the training aids out because I don't know if everybody knows new car smell, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
If you put your training aids into new car smell, guess what your training aids, when you take them out, smell like? New car smell, right? But she did some research and they found like if you just let them off gas for about 30 minutes or so while you're writing up your paperwork at the end of the day, just let them sit out, breathe. They won't go back to the baseline of what they were before you put them out, but they get pretty darn close. And that's like really important information to know. That's the kind of research that I love to get because now that means that I can change and suggest changing our standard operating procedures. So now, at the end of the day, when we're wrapping up training for the day, instead of the guys just throwing everything back into the containers where they're going to be stored, they off-gas them for a minute. And letting them off-gas just gives you that ability to go back as close to baseline. So now they just do their paperwork while they're letting things breathe. And that's been really beneficial and makes me happy to see how it can make science improve operations. So that's what I love about my job right now.
Can you also define off-gas for someone that's like, whoa, what are you talking about?
Oh, yeah. So off-gassing or out-gassing, that is any time a vapor is coming off of the training aid. So your training aids are typically going to be solids or liquids. So solids, when the solid goes straight from solid to gas, that is called sublimation. When it's a liquid, it could evaporate. So pretty much off-gassing is any means of generating vapor out from the original material. It's kind of like a catch-all term. So it's just easier to say than sublimation or evaporation and things like that. So
Gotcha. Thank you.
no worries.
Stacy was asking, what kind of concerns would you have that handlers need to be aware of with training aids that have high vapor pressure?
Oh, that's a good question. So I actually get asked a lot, and hopefully one of these days I'll get some research out there. I'm a big proponent of the research because y'all are very intelligent and you know what you're doing. It just has never been written down before, in a peer-reviewed public article. But when it comes to the high vapor pressure training aids, I recommend 3 levels of containment. So when I'm talking about containment, I'm talking about that's what's holding the training aid. So I'm a big proponent of the 3 levels. So your primary level, that's whatever is touching your training aid. So if you had like TNT, and let's say I put my TNT and I put it into a Ziploc bag because I'm old school and we're using Ziploc bags, right? That Ziploc bag is that primary containment because it protects the environment from touching the training aid material, right? So my training aid material isn't going to pick up stuff. The bag, it's not going to leave stuff. So, right. So that's primary. Your primary containment has to allow odor to pass through it. So it could be a plastic bag. It could be a suet cage. It could be a wide variety of options depending upon what you're training on, right? Then secondary containment, that is going to be your odor containment. So when it comes to those high vapor pressure things or those really, really stinky things that you can smell, if you can smell it, it's high vapor pressure. It means it's going to contaminate things, okay? Your secondary containment is really, really important because you want to make sure it's capturing the odor. So it's not letting the odor out or it's minimizing how much odor can get out. I like the Ted Pella bags, but that's a brand name for like the aluminum bags. So if you heat seal them, that's best. The Ziploc part, unless you're a really good zipper, can sometimes the odor can get through the zipper. I also like mason jars, like the canning jars, where you get the one-piece lid. They get a really good seal on them. So those work really well as well. But you just want to make sure that secondary containment, that's there for odor containment. So the stinkier it is, the more layers you put around it, the harder it is to get out. So if you're working with like nitroglycerin, or I know Robin does like HR, like your stinky decomposing bits, you want to make sure you get them jarred up really good, right? So everything doesn't smell like that.
I was also thinking nosework odors.
Oh, definitely those nosework odors.
Yeah.
And on the drug side of the house, heroin. Everything smells like heroin. So,
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I was thinking marijuana too.
So marijuana, yes, but most of the dogs after marijuana became decriminalized in several states, most of the dogs aren't even on marijuana anymore. So it's not one of their training aids. So now everything kind of smells like heroin.
Interesting. Huh.
But that third level is really important now because now we have our first 2. We have our lets the odor out, but keeps all the particulates in. We have secondary, keeps the odor in from getting contamination out. And then our third level is going to be like that transport case. So if I was working with something exceptionally stinky or exceptionally odor present, a high vapor pressure, I'd want to keep that separate from everything else. If I have the opportunity to do so, I'm going to store all my nitroglycerin separate from everything else. I'm going to store my plastic explosives separate from everything else. Even though I put them in that secondary containment, which is supposed to contain the odor, nothing is perfect, right? So that minimizes, so I can do that through distance. Now, if you don't have the availability to do that through distance, which I totally get, Pelican cases work, mason jars work. You can do the aluminum foil bags in the mason jars and things like that. The more barriers you go through, the harder it is for the odor to get out and contaminate. So that's kind of what I suggest when people ask me how to do this, because it's the same thing. And I know we all know this, but we also don't store our blanks, our blank training aids, if we're using Ziploc bags, our blank Ziploc bags, our gloves, we don't store them in the same place we store our training aid odors, because then they're not blank anymore.
Or right next to our cadaver freezer.
Exactly. Just little thoughts, because they're going to end up smelling like the material. And then you might have a really good dog who has a wide operational threshold. They might start nailing those gloves, and you might get angry because they're hitting the gloves, and they're hitting the gloves because you stored them with your smokeless powder. And now they smell like smokeless powder. And they're not wrong, but y'all just don't like, again, it's just one of those things where you got to like, let's think through all of the possibilities.
We can go out onto Amazon and have those smell-proof cases. And if people can't see the quotes, because, we don't do the visual stuff, the little quotey things I was making with my fingers, are they really smell-proof?
So DHS, S&T, which is Department of Homeland Security, Science and Technology, if you are not paying attention to what they're doing, you should, because they do a lot of good research with state, local, tribal, everybody. They looked into those bags. Dogs are really, really good. So I'm not going to say dogs are infallible or perfect, because we know nothing is absolute, but the dogs are really good. And depending upon the bag and the sealing, and there's a whole multitude of ways we can overcome certain things. But no, those odor-proof bags and things like that, I think they're marketed mainly for drug dealers and drug users. So that way people can't smell their marijuana.
But the dogs can.
The dogs can. So the dogs can. And if there is a zipper or a seam, that's where the dogs get it. And actually, there's John Cromaldi out of the University of Colorado Boulder has worked on this. He is a super, super smart person, fluid dynamics and flow and motion and odor. And I believe he's an engineer, super smart man, published in very, very smart people journals, which are a little over my head. But I got to sit and actually in some of his presentations where he explained some of the stuff that they were doing, and it comes out the seams. They proved it comes out the seams. They did lots of science, physics, math. It's coming out the seams. And that's the same thing with cars. One of their big things is they actually tested search optimization on vehicles, because most people were taught how to search a vehicle by the people who were taught how to do it in the 60s. And if you ask them why do you search a car the way you do? Most people are going to, because that's how I was taught.
Right.
You're like, but why? Why do you do a detailed search on the door seams? Why are you doing a detailed search in some areas, but not other areas? Cars in the 60s are built very differently than the new cars that we have now. Even some of the cheapest models of cars have a ton of sealing around the doors. And that was one of those questions, like, are door seams still productive areas for the dogs? Because if you want a car that doesn't have a lot of road noise, you increase the seams and the padding in between those seams. So in removing the noise, does it also remove the ability for the dogs to catch odor? And turns out, nope, dogs can catch the odor there too, because it's still coming out the seams. But now we have science to prove why it was working, which again, I'm a big proponent of a lot of this research, because I love it when people are like, duh, Katie, duh. And I'm like, yes, but this is the first time we actually have science to back it up that's published in a peer-reviewed journal. So somebody can't say, oh, it's gobbledygook that you made up to sell something or make money, or who knows? Because I'm not in this to make money. The Secret Service pays my job. I am very thankful that I have supervisors that allow me to do a lot of the outreach work to talk, because most people don't have a scientist on their staff or that they can call to ask these kind of nerdy canine science questions. There are very few people you can call to ask questions about, like, should I be searching the pressure relief vent on a car? If it's off or on, does it make a difference? It does, right? It makes a difference, right? Because if the car's off, there's no pressure. So there's no reason for odor to come out the pressure relief vent. It's not a productive area. But if you have the car on and it's not recirculating the air, you're building up pressure in the car. It actually starts to push out that vent.
Where's the pressure relief vent?
So pressure relief vents are typically in the back quarter panels. So again, with all of these new cars, when you shut your door, it almost creates a seal. So if you've ever had a bad pressure relief vent, my old boss had a Jeep, and every time you tried to shut the door, like your ears would pop or the door wouldn't shut properly because his pressure relief valve was broken, right? His car was too airtight. When you shut the door, it's trying to compress the air in there, and the air has to go somewhere, right? So that's why the pressure relief vents are in there. So that way you don't build up too much pressure inside the car. It bleeds out. And typically they're in the rear quarter panels. And then depending upon the make and the model, whether it's on the driver's side or the passenger side, that is a make and model kind of determination. But that's why some dogs, they might catch an odor in the back quarter panel for an interior hide. And then it's just because it's that's where it's leaking out. They shut the door and it gave a pulse of odor out that pressure relief vent. But cars in the 60s didn't have that. Like my first truck was a 77 Ford. It leaked more air than it kept in. So there were lots of productive areas there because it was a rust bucket. But most people learned their techniques for running dogs in the 60s, and they really haven't been updated too much since then. Now, lots of the training theory going from the more Pavlovian and then switching over to the more operant conditioning, those theories have updated and those training mechanisms have updated. But why you run a car, I've seen people fight to the death over, no, we start at the driver's side front headlight and work counterclockwise, with somebody coming back to me saying, no, we work clockwise versus counterclockwise. And they will just back and forth. But really, there's no rhyme or reason other than you need to make sure the dog works completely around the vehicle.
Yeah.
It just doesn't matter. Right.
Like some of it really doesn't. Some people only get one pass around a car. I worked with one organization. They started going counterclockwise, and then they would come back to the start, and then they would go clockwise. So that way, if the odor was coming out and they didn't catch it because they were facing the wrong way, they would get that second chance to catch it coming the other way around. And I was like, oh, that's a really nifty idea.
Yeah.
Like, I can't tell you how to run a dog or train a dog because I don't do that. I am a chemist. But I can give you little tips like, hey, the door seams are productive areas. If they have a sunroof, holy smokes, that's a very productive area as well. So don't forget to bring your dog a little high, because if there's a sunroof, that's a productive area. Are they going to get on top of the car? No. But if your dog goes up, that's important information for you to know. Like, hey, my dog went up, but there's a sunroof. Maybe I need to think a little bit more about this. That's kind of cool research, right? A little bit of a duh, because if you're searching cars, you're like, duh, Katie. But it's 2025, and this research is just getting published now. Everything's been anecdotal up to date, and we're just kind of lucky that we haven't been reamed in court too hard about some of this stuff on the why. And because that's how I was taught how to do it, that's an insufficient answer. That won't work forever. It doesn't work in my job. I can't tell people, well, why'd you do that? Well, because that's just how we've always done it. That answer never works, right? I have to come up, well, we did it that way because we have to do step A, B, and C before I can run this test and things like that. So that's kind of where we're trying to get, especially with a lot of the dog work, because we know it works. And because we know it works, it's hard.
I'm thinking of your duh science, as you call it. I like it.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what areas of canine detection do you think are most in need of further research or collaboration between scientists and trainers?
So to be completely honest, every discipline really, really needs a lot of work. And the reason I'll come out and I'll highlight this for explosives, for example, Texas Tech, just a month or two ago, put out an article on smokeless powder generalization. And that really is a paradigm shift. Growing up and learning all of this stuff, I would have told you it's the similarities. Dogs are generalizing on the similarities. If the things are the same in there, I would have told you, hey, I want you to pick a smokeless powder that has ethyl centralite. I want you to pick one that has diphenylamine. I want you to pick one that maybe has a combination of both or neither. And that's going to give you pretty good coverage because those are additives. Because smokeless powders, if it's single base, they always have to contain nitrocellulose. If it's double base, it has to contain nitrocellulose and nitroglycerin. There's a lot of similarity in all of those compounds. But this research that just came out from Texas Tech tells us it's less about the similarities and more about the differences. So these dogs weren't generalizing like we expected them to because there would have been like one extra chemical. It didn't matter that there were 5 of the same things in there. That 6th chemical in that other piece, nope, the dogs were like, nope, this isn't right. And they weren't reliably generalizing on that. So that research is really putting it on its head. But why is that important for explosive detection? There are thousands of different explosives out there. There are hundreds of smokeless powder formulations. I don't know what a bad guy is going to choose, right? I don't know if they're going to choose something new, old, something they make themselves. So a lot of work needs to be done in generalization to try to figure out how can we cover as much as we can. Are there training paradigms that we can capitalize on to improve our likelihood of generalization? Or can we go to a combination of certain things and that gives us really good generalization? Most people, when they're like, hey, there's 6 mandatory things. I have 6 things in my training aid kit. I'm going to tell you that's not enough. Like when people ask me what should my training, I want you to have like 3 flavors of each of the types, which for some people isn't possible just because their departments don't have that capability. And I get that. But the research that we have right now says that if you're training on 1, generalization is like 50-something%. Training on 2 training aids, you get a little bit better. Training on 3 training aids, you get even a little bit more better, right? So again, we need a ton of research in generalization, especially for explosives. Not to mention, I think there's also some value in getting some more research going on what the dogs are actually alerting on and the types, the working through the appropriate realm of up and down that odor ladder, because the Boston bombers were in pressure cookers. How much odor do you actually think is coming out of that? Inspire magazine had a whole article on how to build the invisible bomb. You're right. So those are things that we need to be aware of because it's all public knowledge, right? It's all public knowledge. So we need to be aware of that and make sure, like, if I'm hiding a training aid, but it's very visible, is that appropriate training for operations? And lots of people are doing it. So again, lots of this is research. You just need it published. But that also bleeds into like the narcotics. So lots of people call them narcotics, but a lot of that is going to change to illicit drugs because not all drugs are narcotics. Some of them are depressants. Some of them are stimulants. So they're not all narcotics. So illicit drug, that's kind of the term we should probably be moving to. But the big one there is fentanyl, right? We use fentanyl as a catch-all. Fentanyl is a compound, but most of what you're seeing, most of what people are abusing and using are fentanylogs, which are analogs of the fentanyl. So very similar in structure, but they just change out one little bit of that chemical with another carbon or an oxygen or something. They change it just enough so that it's not fentanyl anymore. It's a fentanyl. And I think that's going to be a big challenge for canine generalization. I'm really hoping studies start coming out on that, along with what the dogs are detecting. Like cocaine, that's pretty easy. We know cocaine, methylbenzoate, pretty easy. If you're talking heroin, most people are going to tell you, or acetic acid. So heroin, they're going to say acetic acid. MDMA, lots of people are like, oh, that's pyranol. But all of those things, if it's a synthesized drug, so if somebody is making it, whether they're doing it in a lab or they're doing it in their backyard, if they're making it, depending upon what you start with, will change the odor for the dog. Because those precursors, most of those backyard chemists, they're not doing extra washes. They're not removing those precursors. They are doing the Gatorade shaker method to make their meth. Like, that's what they're doing. They're not cleaning it up because they still got meth at the end. But are the dogs being trained on the Gatorade shaker bottle of meth? I don't know, right? Will they get pure, highly pure meth that's being brought in from another country? Will they catch those backyard guys and vice versa? I don't know. So there's a lot of research that needs to go in there as well. But I mean, we haven't even hit on like search and rescue or HR, which, holy smokes, HR is utterly confusing to me because a fresh body, like somebody wants to make an HR training aid, great. But my human nose knows that a freshly dead body smells very different.
Mm-hmm.
An advanced decomposition, which is also very different than like a skeletonized or a mummy
Mm-hmm.
or mummified. So how are you going to make one training aid, right? There's this whole scope of how you have to train and how do you cover, what you need to cover. Not to mention, how do you get access to some of this newer material? And by new, I mean like fresh. Like,
It's hard.
how often does a person doing HR get access to 24-hour-old stuff? Like, how?
Yeah.
That is brain-boggling to me. So there's just a lot of unknown in that. And that's really, really hard because how do you get access to it? And reliable access, legal access, because I know even in some states, you can't even have HR. So how do you make that work? Like, that just boggles my mind.
And Lauren is doing research and even on threshold levels, right? And I know we're helping her out with some stuff at a seminar.
My brain around is the electronics detection, hard drives and things like that. The electronics detection. So those are the guys doing the SD cards, thumb drives, external hard drives. How? It's just plastic and metal. My brain, my chemistry brain cannot get it. I know they do. My brain cannot comprehend.
Are they on the chemical coating that's on the cards?
I mean, maybe, but then they don't alert on like TV remote controls. So like how? So if it's the coating, then that would mean the coatings all have to be the same. The Furton lab out at FIU, they did some work on it. So lots of people starting with like the TPPO or some of those coatings where they thought, hey, it's the coating. It doesn't coat everything though. It's not like an industry standard. So how? Like, it's still the how. So that is one of those my brain just has the hardest time understanding, because how did this conglomeration of plastic and metal, probably some, silica from the circuit boards and stuff, how can the dogs do this?
Just that perfect combo.
Exactly. But they can do it when it's off. Like a lot of the electronic detectors, it has to be on or transmitting for us to find it. And the dogs can just like, it's hidden in a shoe.
And maybe it's a contextualization because it's the one that the disaster dogs do this all of the time. I've seen them almost do a scent inventory on the pile.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll be like, oh, I can find you, I can find you, I can find you, I can find you. And it's all of the people that are standing on the top of the pile. And then they'll drop their nose and they'll find the person who's not on top of the pile, but in the pile.
Yeah.
And it's like, this one I can't do a visual sighting of. So this is the one that I'm supposed to find. It's the most fascinating thing ever.
Oh, that's Auburn. They did a study for like wildlife conservation where people were overfishing certain types of fish. And they taught the dogs to say, hey, ignore the fish on the deck of the boat. find the hidden fish, because the fishermen would put out like their catch, and they would be like, if the limit was 10, they would put 10 on the boat so that hey, here it is. And then they would hide the rest, and they were able to get dogs to find the hidden fish and ignore the ones that were out. And again, this is just brain-boggling, because I would never be able to design a detector that could do the same thing. Like an instrument, like a handheld piece of equipment, all it's going to tell me is it's there or it's not, right? It's not going to tell me where the there is. If it's something hidden, if it's that's the stuff that I can see. None of my detectors can do that. They can just tell me, hey, it's there or it's not. And the dogs can be like, oh, it's hidden in this little secret hidey hole that they built out in the bottom of the hull, and they overcaught, so find them. The dogs are so good at what they do. It's brain boggling. Like it boggles me. And that's the kind of research I like seeing getting done. And I like to track and follow, because figuring out that answers how the dogs are doing it or where we think they're doing things is really interesting to me, because like how?
Yeah.
How can they do this? Like, again, how can they find a person in all of that rubble if there's a building collapse? How can they just fight through all of those contaminating odors? And I guess they're not contaminating, all of those like additional odors, like all of the things. Like it just is amazing to me.
I think it goes back to what you said earlier. And I kind of want to put it on a shirt now. It's what you said earlier. Dogs are really good. I think that just sums it up. I'm going to make a shirt that just says dogs are really good. And it's going to have Katylynn Sloan right there underneath.
Well, they are. But I also want to highlight the handlers too. So you guys are really good at what you do. Like I commend you, because I love going in and talking to people, especially when we're talking about like odor discrimination. Like if we're like seeing other dogs work, and they'll be like, hey, what does your dog's change of behavior look like when they're in odor? And like most people can describe it down to like their left ear twitches, their right leg stiffens, but their front paw shakes, and, their tail stops wagging, right? You can get down to that like super fine detail. And I'm like, I can't even catch that. Like you want me to walk and talk? I'm going to fall. Like I'm going to run into something like, but you guys catch that, because you can say, hey, yeah, my dog is smelling something. They found something, but that's not their change of behavior. They're just in some kind of odor. It's not target odor, because again, their left ear is not twitching. Their tail is still wagging, a mile a minute. It's a squirrel. The fact that you guys can do that is just an amazing skill set that should be commended. You can tell just from a change of behavior. So that way, if your dog doesn't come to that final response, you still have the good enough feeling. You're like, no, I know my dog. My dog's in odor, and I'm going to trust them. Like this is their change of behavior. And you're able to make those calls when the dogs can't come to a final response, because sometimes they just can't. Like, again, Robin and I have been going back and forth because Pavlovian interference has been coming up a lot. And I'm like, I don't get it. Like, I need somebody to explain it, like with crayons, because I'm a chemist. And it's still really hard for me to understand some of these the behavioral information and things like that, because it's just, again, you guys are inherently doing that if you're running a dog. And my brain is just like, I do not compute. I can hear changes in sniffing behavior, and I'm like, oh, I can hear it. But like all of the minutia, while still walking around, not stumbling over your feet, not stumbling over a leash, making sure, remembering, have you searched all of the areas you're supposed to search, up, down, details all around. That is definitely something to be commended, because that's a skill set not everybody has. And you guys worked hard to get there. So again, if there were some research on that, I bet it would be like, we're really good at our jobs. Ha ha, research.
Well, along those lines, I'm curious, How do your findings on odor availability, how are they influencing how people are training detection dogs, how they're deploying in real world scenarios?
So I am a huge fan of pushing to train how you operate, which means that when you can, if you can make things as operationally or as training wise, as close to operations as possible. So if you have the ability to make things up like you would expect to see it in a pipe bomb or a pressure cooker. And again, I'm giving you explosive examples because that's just kind of the realm I live in. I would definitely recommend you doing that. You can't store your explosives like that because it's against rules and laws, and we have to be law-abiding citizens, right? But I would definitely recommend looking into seeing whatever discipline you're working in and then reviewing how you're actually finding things. What does your landscape and in your operational landscape look like? So if you're out in a location, you're seeing a lot of pipe bombs, I'd be practicing pipe bombs if you can. And okay, so you can't make a pipe bomb because it's dangerous. Shameless plug. There is a free available to all on Frontier's article on the manipulation of odor availability of training aids. And that's one I worked on. And it goes through a lot of the things you can do to work up and down the odor availability so that we can make things smell very, very faint. So like there's very, very little there just by putting more barriers. So I can put 6 plastic bags around my stuff and the odor has to get through all 6 plastic bags. So do you think a dog can smell it before it gets out? No, they can't. So now we have like a time scale of things like, I might not put it in a pipe or a pressure cooker, but I can package it up. I could use a TAD, which is a training aid delivery device. I can use an odor restricting cap on there. I can change the surface area. I can do really short set times. If I want to go big odor, because guess what? You set where you want your dog to work. And that's important to remember. So you set a working operational threshold of high and a low where you want your dog to alert.
Yeah.
And if you go and you find something outside of that threshold, your dog is likely going to react in an unknown fashion, right? And that Texas Tech, so Nathaniel Hall, they did a lot of research on this, and dogs only spontaneously generalize down in weight about tenfold, right? So if you're training, it's only about tenfold, which is why like sometimes you'll hear these stories about dogs that are trained on a 1/4 pound missing 1,000 pounds. And it's just because the dogs don't know what to do. Like you taught them that this is their productive. This is what gets them their reward. And if it's outside of that window, they're like, nope, it's not rewarding to me. So you have to practice that. You have to expose your dogs to that possibility. And the longer I've worked in this field, the more I've had to adapt my thought process. Because when I was a young gun, I would have been like, no, it's the odor. They should be able to get it. And now I'm learning, no, dogs can discriminate. And if you teach them this is productive and this is not productive, they're only going to work in the areas that are productive to them because they want that reward, right? So they're going to work and they're going to skip out on other things. It's also the same thing with expectations. And I had the great opportunity to go to the Army Military Working Dog Symposium. And I got to sit in Angel, Robin, help me out with his name, Landro.
Yeah.
I don't want to mispronounce it. His class, amazing class. Like he's doing a lot of things on, it's an article I've been like trying to get published out because when you're training a dog, you're teaching them an expectation. Like when we search a car, the dogs have an expectation of this is how I search a car. And then you show them a different kind of car. Like you're going to show them a 4-door, a 2-door, a box truck. And you're like, hey, these are all cars. I have an expectation that I can find odor on these. You're conditioning the dog to know that, right? So you have to set expectations. And then you also have to be aware of how we as humans are not random at all. We have our likes and dislikes, right? So if you're setting up a training scenario, you have to remember, like, if you're a bad guy, where are you going to hide things, right? Not, it's flipping the switch. It's flipping the thought process. If I am a bad guy, where am I going to hide things versus as a trainer, where am I going to hide this so I can figure out where I think the dog is going to hit, right? How do I think this odor is going to move? It's changing your thought process to how do I think a bad guy is going to set something up, right? And how would I do that? I might hide it in a shoe. I might hide it in other things. And those, again, are just the things that we need to be aware of and you guys need to be aware of. So you can set up training scenarios so you give them that expectation, because the last thing you want is you've never exposed your dogs to a certain scenario and they're like, I don't know how to work this, because a confused dog will likely not react the way you're expecting them to, if that makes sense. Like, they don't have an expectation of how this scenario works, which is, again, why if you're running a car and we always run counterclockwise, if you run the dog counterclockwise, I think was my example, right? If you're on the opposite, they might act a little weird, right? Because they're like, whoa, this is not what we do.
This isn't how we do this. Right.
This isn't right. And you condition them to work the way they work. And if you change the conditions all of a sudden, they will act differently. They're not going to know how to react. You got to think of it like a toddler, and you can't change the game on them in the middle of the game. So again, those are just considerations that you have to think about and try to flip your thought process on how is this going to be the best training for the dog to how is this going to be the most realistic training for what I would expect to happen, right? If I'm searching people, they're not going to look like the Hunchback of Notre Dame with TNT hunched on their back, right? They're going to have a highly concealed suicide vest. They're going to have it in their backpack, like the Ariana Grande. They're going to look different than maybe the way we're training. And I think it'd be very interesting to see how dogs actually perform if we were to set up, like some historical examples and say, hey, we rebuilt the Boston Bomb. We rebuilt the Ariana Grande concert. We rebuilt all of those things. Let's see what happens. How do you do? And I think those results would be very interesting for people to see. And again, it's because you've set the expectation that the odor is not going to come with the metal of the pipe bomb or the pressure cooker or the fabric of the suicide vest. We haven't set those expectations for the dogs because that's exceptionally hard to do.
Well, it was kind of along the lines of what you were saying earlier. I was just wondering, what are kind of the most common misconceptions that handlers are having about how odors are behaving or how dogs are detecting them?
Well, I would also go with a misconception about odor. Odor does not always sink. Okay. So we just have to remember some odors are heavier than air. They're going to sink, right? Some odors are going to be the same buoyancy as air. So they're just going to kind of stay in the area they're at. Same thing with small particles. Some odors are lighter than air. So they're going to go up. So if somebody tells you, oh, odor always drops, shenanigans. And I'm not going to quote who they were, because some people will know them, but they're like, if odor always sinks, you'd never smell my farts walking by. And as gross as that is now an example I will steal because it makes
relatable
sense, right? Odor isn't always going to sink. Same thing with, odor pools here, odor pools there. We don't know diddly squat about that because guess what? Every room is different, okay? The way the heat moves in a room, the way you move. I grew up moving my hands when I talk, right? So you can't see me moving my hands, but my hands are constantly moving. Just me moving my hands is going to change the odor and the way it moves in a room, right? That's why odor movement on a person out in the environment, I think is like a millennium problem. Like, how does this work? Because guess what? Every single piece is going to enter into that equation, right? And it could just be like, in some areas, the odor goes up and over, and then it starts to sink on the other side of the room. Why? Because that's how the HVAC was set up. So that's, again, it's just it's interesting to see how that works. And if you ever have the opportunity to go to one of Lindsay Waldrop's classes or talks or anything, she gives a phenomenal lecture and discussion on odor movement and the physics behind it. Absolutely phenomenal. If you ever have the opportunity to listen to her speak, recommend, like 100% recommend, because they're working on all of those things. So that's one of those big things. Also, smoke bombs and smoke pens and theatrical smoke and all of those things, they're great for like visuals, but realize that they're actually forcing the smoke out, which is not the same as it just moving naturally in the environment. So if it's a hot smoke, heat rises, which means the odor will go up. So you just have to be aware of that. There are some cold smoke things, so it might act a little bit more normally. But again, anytime you put like a pressure or velocity behind something, it might not work the same. But if you're just going for like visual impact, all for it, right? Because it gives you some idea of what's going on. Just realize it might not be exactly like that, because smoke bombs also move really, really fast. So if you set a smoke bomb off in a car, which I don't recommend because it will mess up the car, it'll show you that it's going to come out the seams, but it comes out so fast that you might not catch it. So it wouldn't be as easy of an example for you to go with, other than like might look cool. But from a science perspective, it's just a little too fast to be realistic. So just some thoughts to keep in mind.
You just got to slow down the video and then it's more realistic.
I actually have a whole series where I found some cars that I could do that to. And it's amazing what you can put in a cast iron skillet. So I could put smoke bombs in a cast iron skillet. They're part of my scent theory series. Yeah. So it was kind of fun.
Don't do that with a rental car, though.
No.
They will not take it back very happily.
No, these were junkyard cars. So
I say that's like us with our protection sports. We rent U-Hauls and such to do our protection sports through the windows.
Yeah. Oh, whoops. Oh, my goodness. Hi, everybody. So this is Robin. We're going to stop right there for this episode. And you're going to have to tune in next time for the rest of the episode with Katylynn. Thanks for listening and go train.
Canine Detection Collaborative.
We appreciate the time you spend with us. If you liked this episode, not only should you follow us so you don't miss the next one, but please also rate and review us in your favorite podcast app. For info on collaborating with us, go to k9detectioncollaborative.com. That's K9detectioncollaborative.com, where you can find our socials and pick up our latest monthly freebie. Join us again to talk training in the next episode.